Hi everyone. Welcome to the show. Today's going to be a little bit of an odd one. Earlier today, someone from a radio show in the UK contacted me and said, "Would you like to come onto the channel and discuss something about trans rights?" And I was all prepared to do it, and then at the last minute, they ended up going with someone else, and I had all of these like points in my mind, and I felt like I just needed to get them out of my system, and so that's what the video is today. For anyone who's new here and who doesn't know, my name is Katie Montgomery, and I'm a trans woman. I'm a feminist, hence the background that way, and LGBT rights activist, and particularly argue a lot about trans rights. And I've got to the point now where sometimes radio shows call me and ask if I want to go on the show. And I've been on a couple of shows with other people, like LBC Radio, I went on recently. And there's obviously a range of different people who you can be on a show with. Sometimes they could put you on with a guest who disagrees with you or agrees with you. Sometimes the reviewer could agree with you or disagree with you. So far, I've had kind of favourable ones where the person like interviewing me has been neutral or positive, but I'm working up towards the ones where they're negative, which should be fun. And I didn't know what this one was going to be today. And one of the things that you often get with these radio shows, I've noticed, is they will ask you like 1 hour or less before the show. It's like, hey, can you come on and do this thing in like 45 minutes or something? And I'm not at the point in my experience and life where I'm like, yeah, cool, let's do it. But I feel like I can do that with YouTube. I haven't really planned this, I'm just kind of winging it. But with these radio things, it's such a different audience. Like, it's a big mainstream audience, or even like a politically niche audience, which isn't the kind of audience you get on YouTube or even on Twitter. So that's always kind of nerve-wracking. And the other thing that often happens is you have a really tight time constraint. So on YouTube, like I recently did a discussion with Debbie Hayton, which is interesting, and I might do a review video on that. But on that, this question came up, what's the definition of woman? And we could have this, I mean, it lasted about half the video. It was about half an hour discussion about what that actually means. But a radio show doesn't want some half an hour philosophical discussion. They want 5 minutes, like in and out this topic, done, on to the next topic. We're talking about something else, talking about the war or something. So that is such a different constraint. Those two things added up means that often you will get asked a question and it's not really the question you want to be asked. And they don't really know what the most interesting questions to ask are, or sometimes they want to lead you down a certain path. But you're kind of there to get your points across and to tell the general public about your position. So anyway, this radio show messaged me and I got all ready for it, and then they didn't go with me in the end. I think it was just because of a confusion over messages. I did write in the original description for this that they cancelled. They didn't actually cancel. I was just kind of joking around. They didn't actually book me in or anything, and they've said they'll have me on another time, so that's cool. But yeah, and then I was all just like, because I get this message, I'm like, oh shit, can I do this in 45 minutes? Am I prepared? What is even the topic? Like, do I know this? Get a bit of imposter syndrome, have a bit of a panic attack, my heart's going, and then I have to like big myself up and listen to some like hardcore music, and I'm like, yes, I can do this. I know this topic. I am ready. Do all my makeup, get into the zone. They went with someone else, and they're like, ah. So anyway, that is what this video is. So this radio show wanted to talk about the most boring topic of all in all this trans rights discussion, about the definition of woman. And so there was a Labour MP, shadow cabinet minister. So Labour's like the left-wing kind of centrist party in the UK, and they're the opposition to the government at the moment. And they asked this lady, what's the definition of woman? And she just kind of changed the subject. And somehow that became news because, well, J.K. Rowling decided to make a fuss about it, which is very tedious. And now everyone's just talking about this. And so this guy asked me, do you want to come on the show and discuss why Labour MPs might not want to define the word woman? So I don't know. I haven't actually listened to this guy's show. I don't know where he stands on this topic. And I actually hadn't heard of this lady, Yvette Cooper, beforehand. Though obviously I know this topic very well. So I quickly had a look, and perhaps we'll just have a look what she said. Then I had to prepare in my mind what questions I might ask to make sure I didn't get caught out. And then what kind of message I want to get across. And then how to get that in based on the questions I'm expecting. That was kind of my strategy. So the first thing I did was just Google this to see what was going on. And I think, hopefully, you can still hear me. Yes, you can. That's good. So I just whammed in to Google Yvette Cooper. And like, you see all the classics here. The Times, Daily Mail, GB News. So you know it's going to be a crappy topic when this comes up. So I clicked on the Daily Mail one because I thought this would give me the best. I mean, it's worth looking at all of them, but like, I don't even want to click on anything from the Times, although the Daily Mail is absolutely terrible. But this gives you an idea of if someone's going to ask you a difficult question. You know, it's good to look at what they're saying in the like difficult dickhead newspapers. So here we've got like all the classic Labour still can't say what a woman is as Yvette Cooper becomes second front bencher to dodge the question. So front bench is like the most important part of the party. It's like the people in charge of it. So she's obviously got a very important role. Yes, so she's Shadow Home Secretary. It says she was declined to define a woman. Came after Annalise Dodds saying the meaning of the word is context dependent. So the reason like they're asking this and the reason why I wanted to be very prepared for this radio interview is a classic gender critical strategy is to say, well, define women. And what they are actually asking is, give me an all-encompassing, perfect, strict definition of woman. And then the options from here are either attempting to give one, and obviously there isn't one and they all fall down, and then they offer or then they can just shrug and be like, they don't even know what a woman is. And that's all the argument they need to make. They don't even need to offer up an opposing one. But they could offer up an opposing one, but then they'll just leave it there and they wouldn't even bother defending it and they'll just keep repeating themselves. I mean, this is what happened with my discussion with Debbie Hayton the other day. I went on a long discussion about what definitions even are and like how if someone said define a chair, you can't define a chair in a way that includes all chairs without exception and excludes all non-chairs without exception, because the concept of chair is something we all know. And it's very easy to give a definition of chair like, well, something you sit on, in it. Like that's a good definition of chair. But then if someone said, I am strongly asserting that the only thing that is covered by the definition of chair is something you sit on, then someone would be like, well, what about a horse? What about a wall? What about the floor? These things aren't chairs, but you do sit on them. They'd be like, okay, then it has 4 legs. Well, my chair here has 5 legs, and a horse has 4 legs. And you end up with this situation. And this is because definitions are descriptive. But when you're doing sound bites, that just isn't an option. You can't go off about the last 2,000 years worth of philosophy on definitions. So like this is all stuff the ancient Greeks were doing about, you know, what is a definition and what can we actually define to what level of confidence and all this kind of stuff. But like it's way too advanced for gender critical people, full stop. It's way too advanced for like on the radio in a 5-minute, this was a 5-minute segment. So that's your first option, is to go off on what a definition are. The first option is to give a definition and it'll be broken and then they can try and just shrug. And the second one is to try and do something about definitions like that, which doesn't really work. And then the third one is to kind of change the subject. So that's why they ask this. This is a strategy in its own. They say, what is a woman? And it's not an open and shut question. And they pose it as if you can't give an open and shut answer, then therefore you must be wrong. And so that's the framing you need to challenge when presented with this question. I mean, there is an answer. You can give answers. I mean, people have been writing books on what is a woman and what is a man for, you know, hundreds of years. But there's a reason they're books and not like just the little bit you get in like a fortune cookie or something. It's because it's a difficult question. So anyway, here, I think we've got some quotes here. I was just scanning this one. So it says, She didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. Failure to Mrs. Dodd's failure to provide a definition earned ridicule of J.K. Rowling, who said she needed a dictionary and a backbone. Which is extra embarrassing from J.K. Rowling. So I actually replied to J.K. Rowling when she said this. She said, oh, you need a dictionary. And then I replied with the dictionary definition of trans woman, which says trans women are female, which is then means they're obviously included in the dictionary definition of woman, which is adult female human. So like this whole thing, this whole dictionary argument, that it doesn't hold up for them. It doesn't make sense. But the point is that this is all just about optics for them. They're trying to win over the general population. And they want to say, these people can't even tell you what a woman is, so they must be wrong. And then everyone's like, oh, I know what a woman is. Why would that even be the thing? And then they dominate the conversation completely, and then they just think, oh, these other people must be stupid then. But, I've just realised I'm floating. Hang on, let me move myself down. Video capture. Sorry, I couldn't see my whole window on screen. So that's that's the issue here. So anyway, she's then gone on to say, under a Labour government, it will be apparently under a Labour government, today will become we who must not be named day. So this was the second part of what J.K. Rowling said. So this was on International Women's Day. Of course, J.K. Rowling spent the entire day just attacking trans people and not actually doing anything else, which was embarrassing and just ridiculous. But like the idea here is, if my definition of woman, which is cis women only, isn't the case, and you can't give me this strict one-line definition that fits into a single sentence, like, then there is no other one. There's no other option. So I've created this dichotomy, and you haven't even given me an alternative. So I must be right. Like, that's the argument that's being presented by J.K. Rowling and the gender critical movement. And like, it's a false dichotomy, and like the whole concept of how definitions work doesn't make sense. And even when you look at the definition, it still doesn't exclude trans. It's all just fucking nonsense the whole way down. Like, there's just garbage stacked upon garbage. But the point is, it's this thing that is very common, like in kind of the right wing and like far right thing, where they just, everything's just common sense, isn't it? Just common sense. Don't examine anything I say. I say things quickly that kind of seem right until you analyze them, and then I quickly change the subject and move on to something else. And I make loads of these attacks really quickly, so it takes you ages to go back and see where are the points that I was wrong. And in that time, you're having to defend, and it looks like you're unprepared, and it looks like you're confused, and it looks like I'm really confident because I'm saying woman's adult, human, female, isn't it? Why can't you even answer that question? What's the alternative then? You don't even know, do you? You don't even know. And some people are obviously won over by that. There's a really good video on this by Innuendo Studios. It's got a series called Outright Playbook, and there's this one called Never Play Defense or something like that. And it like describes this tactic quite well. But anyway, so just going on to this, Yvette Cooper said, I think people get themselves down such a rabbit hole in this one. Let's just celebrate International Women's Day and amazing women all over the country, amazing women all over the world, but challenge the inequalities and say what it is we need to be doing for the future. So that, like, this is a really good answer. Like, I am a trans woman. This affects me a lot, and I really care about trans people's rights. But I'm also a feminist, and I also fully recognise that although trans people are a culture war issue, this, like, the patriarchy as a whole and the whole like attack on trans people's rights in general is part of the attack on gay people's rights, and it's part of the attack on women, and it always comes from the same people, and it's all the same groups, and it's all the same like patriarchal garbage, and there are just way more cis women and there are way more cis gay people than there are trans people. And if we're having this fucking boring what even is a woman discussion, like International Women's Day, are we talking about how the USA is about to like make abortion illegal? Are we talking about, you know, the inequalities in the UK for women, and how like the increased gas prices is going to affect women worse because it's like everything that affects everything economic affects women worse, and that's like a feminist issue? Are we going to be talking about refugees in Afghanistan and the Ukraine? Like, you know, how women are affected more there, how LGBT... But no, we're not. We're going to argue about the fucking definition of women because it's some cultural garbage that J.K. Rowling is obsessed with, and she's so famous that just totally dominates the conversation. So we now have this day for women to address women's rights and women's injustices that they face, and instead we're just arguing about some hypothetical garbage nonsense in the dictionary. And it's a waste of time. So Yvette Cooper's right. Why aren't we celebrating women, and why aren't we addressing the inequalities? And then, of course, when she says that, they all just want to talk about trans people again, because it's the thing they're obsessed with at the moment, and it's a waste of time. So anyway, that was about as much looking as I did for this radio show. I was like, okay, I know generally what's going to come here. So got ready, and I set up this background. So I think I probably should have put it a bit more off center. It's just like a female feminist thing with a fist. Part of like these appearances, there's a lot to consider, because there's what you're going to say, and I'll go on to that in a minute about what questions I was predicting and what answers I was going to give to them. But there's a lot more to that than this as well, because there's also the framing of what's going on. Like sometimes they might say, you know, we want this situation, how trans rights combat women's rights. And a trans woman could go on in that place and do that argument. But then it kind of plays into their framing of trans women versus cis women. So if you have a choice, or if you have a friend who's a trans man who's willing to do this, it's so much better if a trans man does it, because it says like, well, you haven't even considered this. This isn't the battle here. There isn't a conflict here. And the framing is something they control, because they always control the media, and we're always on the defense on everything. And another important thing is they constantly are trying to push this idea that it's feminists versus trans people, which is utterly ridiculous, when the gender critical movement is just openly pushing the patriarchy, like constantly teaming up. Someone today, some gender critical person was like, oh no, I'm right about trans people being bad, and linked me something from Family Research Council, which like, well, I can get it up right now. The little description of Family Research Council. Like absolutely no one who is like a feminist of any kind would just be like blindly pasting out Family Research Council research. I mean, so they're an American evangelical activist group. They promote family values. They oppose and lobby against access to pornography, stem cell research, abortion, divorce, LGBT rights, including anti-discrimination, same-sex marriage, same-sex civil unions, and adoption. They have been characterized by media sources and professional organizations for using anti-gay pseudoscience to conflate homosexuality and paedophilia, and falsely claim that children of same-sex parents suffer more from mental health issues. Like, no one is looking at that and being like, this is a neutral source. Like, no feminist. And it's just so constant, the idea, the media is pushing it's feminist versus trans people. It is not. It's feminists versus gender critical people. That is the actual, like, argument here. Because most trans people are pro-trans rights. Like 99% of us, but only so many of us have the energy to do it, or the skills, or the availability, the ability to fight for trans rights. Because we are so outnumbered by cis people, it just ends up that most of the people who are pro-trans rights are cis people, and most of them are women, and a lot of the cis women who are pro-trans rights are feminists. Like that, the majority of, I would say, trans rights activists are cis women feminists. And every single time, every single poll that we've seen in the UK over the last 5 years, every single time it's just over half of women support trans rights and just below a quarter oppose. And then for men, it's just over half oppose trans rights and then a third support trans rights or something. Most of the people who oppose trans rights are men. None of them are feminists. Some of them have feminist backgrounds, and they have done a good job of like spinning that in the media as, oh, this is a feminist action, but it just isn't. So anyway, on the framing, I wanted to combat that. Like, I am a woman, I am a feminist first, because that is why I'm pro-trans rights. I was a feminist first, and then I was pro-gay rights, and then that enabled me to become pro-trans rights and enabled me to come out. That's like the order this happened. I didn't come out as a trans person first and then suddenly realize that women's rights affected me and then become a feminist. Like, that's the opposite way round. So I wanted to bring that in. And then the other thing is, the sad reality is you just have to look nice. If you don't look good, then you will get more abuse and more bigoted people will want to have a go and people won't take you seriously. And that is the disgusting, sad reality of the media internationally. And definitely the UK does nothing to combat that. We're just as bad as any other country. So that is why I felt like I needed to be here with my full lighting setup, have my makeup done and all this kind of stuff. So that was like the preparation that went into this. So this is why, like, I was feeling like I need to like vent this out in this video. But anyway, so I was thinking about what questions is this guy going to ask. I was thinking, well, the question they said to me is, why are Labour candidates or Labour politicians dodging the word woman? So I thought that's the first question that I should think about. And the answer to that is, I think there's like three parts to this. The first is because anyone who says anything even remotely pro-trans, even slightly, gets a horrific pile-on. Like, Yvette Cooper here has completely copped out, has deflected what she said is right, but she didn't say trans women are women and we should support them on International Women's Day. Now let's talk about abortion in the USA or something. She didn't say that. She just said, oh, I don't want to talk about it. And that's because then she got all this abuse. She was suddenly on the front page of the Daily Mail and stuff. Not the front page, but she was, being attacked by all the different newspapers and this radio channel's having a discussion about it. It's because you get so much abuse. I got a pretty grim death threat this morning. I've had loads of them for, these kind of like Twitter ones where they're like, oh, I'm going to do this to you. You just get them all the time as a trans person. And it's relentless, and some of them are more scary than that. And it puts people off talking about this. And that's kind of the point. It's not just the extremist death threat stuff, because that isn't nice, but it is mainly from stupid teenagers in America or whatever who just write, oh, I'm going to kill you, and then and that's it. And that's not nice to get. But in a way, sometimes they're serious, and when they're serious, you absolutely need to take them seriously. But we can't just say, oh, when there aren't these death threats, that there's nothing else. Like, if sometimes they'll do these pylons, you get like 600 plus replies from people calling you a child abuser, a paedophile, saying you hate women, saying you hate gay people, saying you, like, just giving you all these really extreme accusations and really heated and coming in and just making up things about you, saying that you're, a liar or all these other kinds of things. Like, sometimes you see some cis women say, I support, I think trans women should be able to use the toilet. I've got a friend who's trans and she can use the toilet with me. And then someone's like, oh, so you want to be raped, do you? And it's like, that is so horrific. And it happens worse to women, of course. All of this fucking happens worse to women. So that is probably the first reason why none of them want to flip and take on this subject. The second is, what I was discussing about earlier, is the framing. This is a trap question on purpose. The full answer to this, perhaps I'll go on to that in a minute, but the full answer to this is long, and the whole point is they want you to not be able to give a quick answer and then use that as evidence that you don't have an answer and then cut you off before you can give an answer. And politicians are super aware of this. They say a thing, they'll give a 4-hour speech or whatever, they'll go on for ages and ages, and there'll be one sentence in it and it'll be on the front page. So you need to, I guess, choose your words carefully. And it's garbage. Because, like, this is kind of why I like these why I like these discussions in writing more than like as a live debate or something, and even in these like live video essay discussions or whatever, because you can express all your thoughts in order and stuff, and then they're presented as a unit. And when someone says, "Oh, Katie said this," I can be like, "Yes, it's in this article. Here's the context." Whereas if it's like in some discussion or you're live on TV or you're in a situation where the media controls how much of what you're saying anyone gets to see, then it's very easy to take out of context. And then I wanted to make the third reason why I don't think Labour MPs are giving a proper answer to this is because the Labour government strategy at the moment seems to be do absolutely nothing on any issue and keep our heads down until voting, and then we'll just be like, hey, we're not the Conservatives, and hope that we get in power. That just seems to be their strategy. Like Keir Starmer and whoever else is in charge of making the decisions in Labour seemed to have decided that they're not going to stand up for trans people. They'll give a little, we believe trans people deserve the freedom and equality to express themselves. They'll give one of these like politician answers, but they won't give a strong, they won't say, we are going to defend trans rights, or trans rights don't clash with cis women's rights, or we should reform the Gender Recognition Act and make it so trans people have healthcare within 18 weeks like everyone else in the NHS. Because they know when they start saying it, people will start saying all of this garbage, and they'll get a big pile up, and suddenly it'll be on the front page of the news, and the news will attack them, and the Conservatives will go off and have their COVID parties and get Russian oligarch money and stuff, and it just won't get picked up on because most of the news is right-wing. So their strategy here is keep their head down. I mean, they saw what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, whether you like him or not, and whether you think that the anti-Semitism thing has teeth or not. Like the media went all out on the Labour Party for like years, and it definitely affected their voting thing. So you can see why they're doing this, but that is another reason that the Labour Party aren't talking up about trans issues, is because trans issues are a culture war thing, and culture war stuff gets and loses you votes. And their strategy is to not engage, which is pathetic. So I wanted to sum up those 3 points. Try and go in hard explaining those 3 things. I wanted to say, like, you get a horrific amount of abuse for talking about this. And that's an important thing to put out there about, because it's never covered. There was like, oh, J.K. Rowling gets these death threats. She does. That's horrific. But every single person who disagrees with her seems to get death threats. And we're not all billionaires who live in castles. Like, the threats, I actually got three today, were all from disagreeing with her. And that never gets talked about. So I wanted to bring that up. I wanted to say, go on to like this definition of women being complex thing, and point out the Labour are bullshit. Like, that's what I wanted to go for. And then I was trying to think about what more hostile questions he might ask. Or he might have just been like, all right then, Katie, what is the definition of women? And then I need to fit in my little 5-minute segment where he's probably going to interrupt me if I start talking about the definition of chair or something. He's going to, I need to fit in a good answer here and steer it into a way where this isn't just going to me fall into this trap that Yvette Cooper's fallen into. So how I would have answered it, and I think this is the best way to answer this, is to address the framing of the question. Say, well, the reason that anyone is asking this, because otherwise it wouldn't be interesting, is because they want to come up with an excuse to take rights away from trans people, particularly trans women, the rights that we already have today. They want to say, oh, you don't have ovaries, you don't have XX chromosomes, or whatever. I'll just make up some definition on the spot, and that is why you should be banned from the toilets. And that's the whole point in this definition exercise. That's why they're asking. And whatever definition you create that excludes trans women is inherently useless, because the entire point in any of these things, women's toilets, protections for women, women on the boards in Scotland, the big debate they had recently about that. The whole point in all of those things is to combat misogynistic sexism. And trans women face misogynistic sexism. So if you're making up definitions of women that don't include them, then you're failing to be able to address misogynistic sexism. That's the whole point here. So And the reality is that it is just more complicated. Society is more complicated than a single sentence definition, and biology is more complicated than a single sentence definition. Whatever definition you come up with is going to have exceptions. It's going to have grey areas. That's just the reality of the world. People do not fit in boxes. And that's the kind of answer that I wanted to go on this. I wanted to make it clear that the whole point of this is just to attack trans people. It's not... No one who's arguing about this, no one has some general, oh, I wonder what the definition of woman is. Like, it's literally a load of people offended by trans people who want an excuse to take our rights away, and a load of people who either are trans or know trans people and don't want their rights to be taken away, battling over some proxy garbage. And I think it's important to get that across. And I kind of thought that might be the 5 minutes. I mean, there's only a couple of things that's going to cover here, and to get it off. And maybe there would have been some argument about J.K. Rowling, and I could have gone off on her and how she just uses her huge platform just to bully trans people. Done absolutely nothing to comment about. Her words have recently been quoted in courts and law-making situations in several states in the USA to take healthcare away from children, and then justify, one state's just always trying to pass a situation where it would be the case that if you have a trans kid, you could get sent to prison for life. If she's going to try and pretend, I just have concerns, and it's this person just quoted you and is using it to tear families apart. Are you going to have an opinion on that? Are you going to condemn that? No, of course she's not going to fucking condemn that. Abortion is being taken away from people. Is she going to talk about that? No, of course not. Doesn't give a fuck because she's obsessed with trans people. And that's what I would have said, but I would have tried not to say fuck. Anyway, I hope that was kind of enlightening. I do actually, so I found out what happened with this radio situation. So they asked if I wanted to do it, and I must have replied a little too slowly, or they didn't. I think they just didn't see my messages. And they got another lady on to have the discussion. And I actually have it here, and we can listen to it, and I'll live react to it. I think that's what I'm going to do now, and I hope that that's a thing that you can do on YouTube without getting copyright strike. This is the first time I've listened to it, and we'll go through in stages, and I'll stop and react to how the presenter was and how I think she did, and then we'll wrap up, and that'll be the end of the video.
I want to look at this story because this is an area that genuinely fascinates me. And maybe as a bloke, I don't have the conventional dog in the race on this kind of thing. So it began.
So I think this is a good, it's a classic point, and it is kind of right. If you're a cis man, why the fuck do you have an opinion on this? But it's not entirely true because, well, I mean, he said as a bloke, and I don't know, a third of all trans people are blokes. However you look at it. There are a lot of trans blokes out there. Shout out to the trans blokes in the audience. They only ever say bloke when they want to convey manly cis men, not just men. But also there are men who have trans children, men who have trans parents, trans brothers and sisters, siblings, cousins, everything. So there are men who are first-hand invested in this. But I think it is fair of him to recognise that lots of men just don't. Well, I don't think no cis people should really have an opinion, but anyway.
And with Yvette Cooper, she's become the sort of second shadow minister in 2 days to decline to define what a woman is.
So the way this is presented, it kind of makes me feel like this is going to be the thing that they do. They're going to ask all of the Labour ministers to define women. It's going to be very tedious.
Have a listen to this.
I don't know. I think people get themselves down rabbit holes on this one. I just think let's just celebrate International Women's Day and amazing women all over the country, amazing women all over the world, but also challenge inequalities and say what it is we need to be doing for the future. Why are we all kind of getting ourselves tangled up?
Well, I think it's because a lot of people would say, well, I know what a woman is. It's really straightforward. And then it feels that politicians start to get themselves into rabbit holes about.
Yeah, as you can see, I'm avoiding going down a rabbit hole because I just think this is pointless.
So she avoided...
So, yeah, when the guy... So this is must have been the guy interviewing Yvette Cooper was like, Well, most people will say it's straightforward. And then when politicians can't answer it, it seems mad. And then that's a true observation, and that is the intention of this framing. That's why gender critical people do it, because they want the ordinary person on the street to be like, hang on, why can't this person tell me, I know what a woman is, like my wife's a woman. And this is where Labour politicians should be doing a lot better. All politicians, everyone should be doing a lot better and be like, yeah, people do know what a woman is. And some of the people you meet on the street and you're like, yeah, that's a woman, are trans women. And there are a lot of people who are very dedicated to taking their rights away. And there are also people out there and you might meet them and you'd be like, well, I know this isn't a cis woman and I know this isn't a cis man. And then they've introduced themselves as a woman, so it must be a trans woman. And like, oh, well, do I think this person's a woman or not? And they have their little like discussion in their minds or maybe with the person. And this is the kind of thing that they should be bringing up. They need some kind of like streamlined answer for this. And I think they just need to say, the reason that we're having this discussion, like when he says, well, there's a lot of people who know what a woman is and they're all wondering why you can't answer. She should say, well, the reason that people keep asking this is because they want me to say whether I think we should take rights away from trans women. And the answer is no, because society thinks they're women and the law thinks they're women. So end of question. Like, what more do you want? Do you want to challenge me? Do you want to give me an actual definition of woman that you think excludes all trans women and includes all cis women? And we can have this boring discussion where you say, what about chromosomes? And then I say, what about this cis woman here is XY who's giving birth? Like, that's where you want to have this kind of turnaround. I know what you're doing. This is about you trying to come out with an excuse to take trans rights away, and they already have the rights. Fuck off. Challenge me. Make a claim. You're the one who needs to be on the defense on this. Anyway.
She was questioned, of course, on that issue after J.K. Rowling, the author and former Labour donor, criticised the party's stance on transgender rights. Just under 24 hours earlier, Annalise Dodds, Labour's Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, also struggled with the question on the BBC.
Labour's definition of...
that's important. Like, they can now describe it as a struggle. If you don't have a clear answer, if you're not like, the reason we're being asked this because you want to take rights away from trans women, like, if you don't do that, then they're going to be like, oh, well, they struggled. Oh, these people are idiots. Oh, don't vote for Labour. Or don't, all the Conservatives or whoever, if you're a politician and you're asked this question, you need a good answer to it. And you need to have a good trans positive answer to it, because otherwise they're going to trick you into saying a dog whistle, or they're going to, or maybe you're anti-trans, and then like, just sort it out. It's not that difficult.
A woman?
Well, I have to say that there are different definitions legally around what a woman actually is. And you've got the biological definition, legal definition, all this kind of thing.
With respect, I didn't ask for that. What's the Labour definition?
Oh, I think with respect, Emma, I think it does depend what the context is, surely.
Well, after that...
So, I mean, she is kind of right. She's literally right in that it's possible to be legally a woman on your passport and legally a man on your birth certificate at the same time. Like that's just true. So in terms of what the legal definition is, you can be both at once, or you could be all one or all the other. There's like 5 different contexts. There's like passport, driving license, birth certificate, taxes, like HMRC. I don't know. There's a few different ones. Banks. I mean, Virgin Media, maybe. Like, there's all student loans. Student loans are the only one that still think I'm a man, by the way. So that is literally true, but it's not a good soundbite answer, because people, like, if people haven't encountered this before, they'll be like, what do you mean, like, in different contexts? Are you saying that if I go to a house party, I'm a man? Is that what you're saying? Like, the gym, I'm a woman? Like, what is this different context thing? And... I mean, really what she should have said here is like, the definition of woman in society, in law and biology is very complicated, and you can't just easily put people into boxes. And then the interviewer might say, well, what's the Labour definition of woman? And she should say, we support the law in which trans women are protected against misogynistic sexism by the laws that protect women. Like, that's what Labour should be all about. Labour supports Gender Recognition Act reform so that trans women are able to update their birth certificates so they're allowed to get married and die in dignity. Like, That's what she should have said. Instead, she ended up flailing a little bit, and then now they can say, oh, she wasn't sure either, and then J.K. Rowling can be like, oh, get a dictionary, love, and then people can link the dictionary definition of trans women at her.
Exchange, the Harry Potter author tweeted, someone please send the Shadow Minister for Equalities a dictionary and a backbone. Labour, no stranger, of course, to this row. It was autumn last year, just before their party conference in Brighton, when their leader, Sir Keir Starmer, made headlines with this claim.
Is it transphobic to say...
Transphobic.
Only women have a cervix?
This is just the most... Like, all of these things... This is like the gender critical thing. It must just be so easy for their propaganda department. Like, they're just like, we'll just ask a new thing. Like, really what they're saying is, we think trans women are men. So then they come up with a little thing like, cervixes. Only women have a cervix. And then someone's like, well, that's not true, is it? Because my mate's a man and he's got a cervix. And also the way you're saying it makes it feel like you think all women have cervixes, and that's not the case. And then you have this big fucking argument about that. And then it can be like, only men have testicles. And you're like, oh, that's just the same thing. Can you not just say, I think trans women are men? Can't you just say that? And the reason they don't say that is because that doesn't land as well. Like that, if you get these little innocuous things like, oh, do you think that we should have single-sex hospital wards? And people will be like, yeah. And they'll be like, people think you're transphobic for that. And they'll be like, oh, really? No, they don't. It's all just coded garbage where you have to wade through and be like, the transphobic bit is the bit where they say trans women are men, therefore they shouldn't have the rights they have today. That's the transphobic bit. But instead we've got to have this like little proxy garbage battle about whether men can have a cervix or not. Like, oh, just piss off.
Well, it is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right.
So.
Something that shouldn't be said. Like, that's even worse. I mean, it's almost worse than him just saying yes or no. Like, oh, something shouldn't be said. It makes it sound like some kind of unnameable truth. Like, oh, well, I think it's true, but it's like illegal to say that because of races. Like, no, mate, he's trying to fence it. Like, Keir Starmer is the king of fence sitting. He's trying to fence it, and it just comes across ridiculous, cringe, absolutely. Like, the problem with fence sitting is often you make enemies with everyone. Like, all the gender critical people would have been like, they can't even define women, they think so, and then all the trans people would have been like, well, that's fucking pathetic. Couldn't you have just said, well, it's factually true that some trans men have a cervix, so if you say only women have a cervix, you're factually wrong. Like, that could have been his answer. Next question. In law and in society. Done. But no, we're stout.
How do you define a woman? Kate Neves, trans ambassador and founder of Cool to Be Trans, joins us now. Afternoon to you, Kate. Cool to be trans, certainly not easy, though.
True.
Will be back with us over the coming days, I'm sure, to tell us more. Katie,
so
something like India.
It's got nothing to do with gender. Quantify it.
Yeah.
They can have a vagina.
Sorry.
Or what's called intersex. No, that's
the biology.
Babies, no surprise.
Getting away from trans people, but there is a distinction.
Oh, I'm so annoyed. Sorry, I clicked in the wrong place and took it all the way back. What was I on?
There's only a very small minority of people who are transphobic.
Jip has come your... A woman, so Kate Neves, trans ambassador and founder of Cool to Be Trans, joins us now. Afternoon to you, Kate. Cool to be trans, certainly not easy, though.
It's certainly not. Hi, and it's Katie, by the way.
Apologies. We had that very
good name
conversation in the office, strangely enough. And I went and fell down the rabbit hole. There you go.
Don't worry. Lots of people do.
It is I mean, seriously, before we get into the kind of nitty gritty of what Yvette Cooper was or wasn't saying, I mean, at the moment...
Seems quite reasonable so far. This would have chilled me out. It's good when people don't come in with this, like, hot, hostile question straight away, like, hello, this is Katie Montgomery. So, Katie, why do you think that men should be in women's prisons? Like, you know, it's a bit more welcoming when they make a joke about your name first.
The whole issue of being trans, as far as I can remember, trans people have been around since I've been alive, and nobody blinked very much. And suddenly, in the last couple of years, an explosion.
Good point, Ian.
Of grief and jip has come your way.
Yeah, I mean, trans people have been around ever since there've been people, basically. So there've always been trans people. There's not always been the technology to allow trans people to transition, but there've always been trans people. But it's just got toxic in the last few years, really, since the review of the Gender Recognition Act. And
so Katie is definitely right there. I would totally agree with what she said there. It's a good answer.
It's just stirred up an awful lot of hatred. But in general, most people are absolutely lovely. Most people in real life are, they're either very supportive or they're either neutral but respectable. Sorry, not respectable.
Most people aren't respectable. She's right. Like, this is just something, and it's like advice that I give on Transatlantic Call-In Show, which is 11 p.m. UK time tonight. You should all come watch. It's advice I give out quite a lot. People see all this stuff on the internet before they've come out as trans, and they're worrying like, well, if I come out, am I going to get all this abuse on the street and stuff? It does happen sometimes, especially when you're early in transition. But like, I've had it some in the years that I've been out, but most days, and now, where I am, I just have been years without any abuse on the street. And people, when you meet them and you're like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm a trans person, they're just like, oh, that's cool. And then sometimes they're just like, let's change the subject. And sometimes they're like, I want to ask you really personal questions about your genitals. But, people are just generally nice and supportive. Wherever you are, just on the internet, it's consolidated all of the dickheads.
Respectful.
Yeah.
Respectful.
Yeah.
Sorry, respectful. There's only a very small minority of people who are transphobic and are trans hostile. Obviously, J.K. Rowling being one of them, as you spoke about her earlier on, and she's got form on this. She's
correct.
She only cares about women's rights when she can use it to weaponize it against trans people, and I think she's been.
I would have said that, but I would have if I'm being hypercritical. This is really good so far, Katie. Nice work. I would have said she only pretends to care about women's rights rather than she only cares about women's rights, because what women's rights does she care about? I mean, what does she actually talk about? She only talks about trans rights.
Misusing her great fan base, because she's a brilliant author, and I take nothing away from her as an author, but she's got.
So I recently watched Sean on YouTube does loads of good left wing videos if you're into that, and he's done quite a few on transphobia and they're all quite good. He recently did one on Harry Potter, and up until watching that video, my standard was to say she's a good author, she's a much better writer than me, I'm not trying to take that from her, I'm not one of these people who just hates Harry Potter just because she's transphobic. My issue with her is she's transphobic. After watching the Sean video, I'm not so sure. It kind of seems like a garbage author and a garbage person all round, but it is worth highlighting that, because this isn't just some kind of I know they was I get messages like this all the time. Oh, Katie, you're just jealous of J.K. Rowling. Like, jealous of what? Like, she's a billionaire. I would that's a disgusting thing to be. Like, I would never want to be a billionaire. Like, she's transphobic. I don't want to be transphobic. She's written some kids' books. I don't like writing. I kind of hate it. I don't like Harry Potter. I never liked it. I've read 2 of the books and watched the 4th film. The music's good. No. But there are people who might just be like, oh, is this jealousy? No. She's a good enough writer. She's made a load of people happy, and everyone who still enjoys Harry Potter, but who also doesn't like that she's transphobic, I'm happy that they can still enjoy Harry Potter. Like, good. If that's part of their life, I'm happy for that.
This brilliant fan base, and she's building it up to attack trans women, and the whole thing is just toxic.
But is she attacking? Again, I come at this from, a male perspective, which is different to the perspective you would have, Jake.
Controversial. He's taken a side. Trans women aren't male. Write that down.
Okay. Would have India Willoughby, who I was talking to on text just before this show. You
shout out to India.
Got a different position than I have, perhaps. I wonder whether, because I read the J.K. Rowling blog she wrote. I'm sure you've read it too, Katie.
Yeah.
And I read that and thought, okay, what she seems to be saying is that there is such a thing as a biological woman, and the backstory that goes with that, and the word woman that has a very special relevance and place with that. Don't take anything away from trans people, but
if you got the idea from her little spiel that her position is don't take anything away from trans people, then you have misread it. My goodness. But no, he's right. I mean, that is, a lot of people would have read that and just been like, oh, well, she just hates criminals. What's the problem? Oh, she just cares about kids. She just doesn't want them getting too early treatment. What's the problem? The problem is that loads of what she said was factually false. And she spread a lot of conspiracy theories like rapid onset gender dysphoria. She pushed a load of transphobic people like Magdalene Burns and Maya Forstater. And she's just made all this stuff up like, oh, we have to worry about all these predators who are pretending to be trans, when it's just not true. That's just a classic transphobic trope used to justify taking rights away from trans people, which is what she's pushing for, which you can see because she's pushing all of these people and organisations. Like Maya Forstater signed this WDI declaration calling to remove like basically all trans rights. J.K. Rowling pushes her all the time and says that she's brilliant, all these things. Joanna Cherry is like in with all of these groups. And she got some award recently from some organisation that gave an award to Joanna Cherry and gave an award to Posey Parker, who's the one who said that men with guns should go into women's toilets to intimidate women who they think are trans, and has said that all trans men should be forcibly sterilised, and has said all kinds, and said she's an anti-feminist. And like J.K. Rowling was like, oh, well done for Joanna Cherry winning this award or whatever. It's like, she won an award from an organisation which gave a similar award to like this absolute fucking nut job, mate. Like, J.K. like there's this thing, like imagine, but it's like the level of plausible deniability. Imagine a situation where J.K. Rowling genuinely only has concerns. Like if that's the case, or maybe she thinks that we should have some kind of regulations here, but she doesn't want to take rights away from 99% of trans people, and she doesn't want to just hurt trans people for no reason or anything. Like if we actually take that as her actual position, then when someone says, hey, you know that person who you were bigging up, they openly want to remove all trans rights. Don't you think she'd be like, oh no, that isn't me at all. Like, even if she then said, oh, they're a nice person in real life, and I don't actually think Maya Forstater should have lost her job in that case. However, her position on banning all trans women from all toilets, I don't agree with that. That's abhorrent. I'm going to talk to her in private or whatever. Like, she doesn't do that because she doesn't think that. She doesn't give a fuck. Like, she supports all this stuff. Like, of course she does. Like, anyway, ranting.
That there is a distinction between trans people and a biological woman. That I think is what she's saying.
I think.
So, this is one of these little things where people use their own terminology, and if you start correcting them, it can derail. So what I usually do is strongly just use the correct terminology and explain at the start. And I would say there is a difference between cis women and trans women, because that's why we use the words trans and cis. And cis means not trans, or what you're calling a biological woman here, but everyone is biological, so that doesn't really make any sense. And that's where I would go from in this point.
I think the problem is, I think she's playing to the fact that most people have little or no education about the difference between sex and gender. So would you like me to explain that?
Yeah, go for it.
Uh-oh. See where you go with this, Katie.
Yeah, okay. So the thing, what we need to do is just go back to basics to begin with. So let's talk about sex to begin. Oh, that's a song, isn't it? We'll go back to sex.
I'm not going to sing it, by the way.
No, please don't. Not that
I don't know that song.
I've heard your singing voice.
Yeah, it's not good.
Isn't it? Oh dear. But we'll talk about sex. So we're all just born as babies, no surprises there. But we're born as babies with various bits. We've got bits between our legs, bits between our ears, bits inside our bodies, bits on the ends of our arms and legs, bits everywhere. But the only bits that count in terms of our birth certificate are the appearance of the bits between our legs.
So I get this. This isn't me criticising Katie. I think it's quite common for people not to want to talk about these things. And I think that I've talked about this so often with people who are so dehumanizing and disgusting that I've kind of desensitized it. But I just use these words straight up. I don't like euphemisms. I'll be like, people are classed purely on their genitals. That's the word for it. That's the word I'm going to use. We say gonads if we want to, like whatever. But like, yeah, there's otherwise you end up saying bits and bits and bits, and it all gets a bit confusing. Just use the right words. But no, Katie's making a decision, and I can't really criticize it.
So when a baby's born, the doctor or midwife looks between the legs of the babies, and they have a choice. And in this country, it's a binary choice of which label to give the baby. It's either boy or girl. That's all it is.
So I guess this is like the going down the sex is more complicated than we think route. And I get that. I mean, that is a valid argument. The gender critical position has two key pillars, and both of them have to be true. One is that sex is an immutable binary, and the second part is that is the thing that we should be segregating society on, and they need both of those to be true, and they are both false. Sex isn't an immutable binary, but even if it was, if it is the case that all trans women are males, then very clearly this value, sex, which trans women are male in this case, doesn't predict what sexism they face, who finds them attractive, how society treats them, any of that stuff. So therefore it's not a good property to base laws on. So we need something else. So both parts of these are false. And when you approach like the J.K. Rowling gender critical, like generic stance, it can be very easy to get bogged down into the definition of sex and the definition of male and female, and see where that's going. But I usually, if people want to go there, I'll do it. I actually really like talking about biology, but I usually try and break up into those 2 points and be like, well, J.K. Rowling is trying to claim that, you can only be a man or a woman and you can't change that. She's actually wrong about the biology, because the biology is much more complicated and there's all kinds of combinations. And she's also wrong that you can't change, because there are loads of different sex characteristics and people can change all the sex characteristics that matter in day-to-day life. Like, their breasts and their genitals and their gonads and their facial hair and all of this kind of stuff. And that changes. And then we can move on to the second part, which is the more important part, which is it doesn't make any sense to use birth sex as the thing to determine what rights people have.
So you're saying it's just based on the biology. It's based on your willy and your uterus.
Willy's a funny word.
That's exactly what it is. So, but the trouble with nature is it's very messy. It doesn't do binary things. So there are very many people who are what's called intersex. Now that's nothing to do with being trans, but I need to explain this first of all.
Yeah, this is an argument route. Like I do so much arguing. I'm just seeing this as all like meta argument strategies. A route to showing that gender critical is false is getting them to make an assertion of what sex is and showing counterexamples. And you can do it forever. Like whatever they say. Sex is defined by birth genitals. What about this person? Sex is defined by chromosomes. What about this person? There's always a counterexample. Binary means strictly two, therefore you're wrong. Like your ideology is wrong. I don't need to propose an alternative to your ideology to say that your ideology is wrong, because we always got a counterexample. That is an argument strategy. You need to kind of deploy that very... The thing is, the important part here is sometimes you will get a gender critical person to back down to that position. They'll never then absorb that and that become their position. They might just agree like, oh, okay, so what? There's exceptions. That's nothing to do with trans people. The important thing here is that you've got all these different sex characteristics and they can be pointing in different directions. This bit might look like you should be called a man, and this bit here might look like, now I'm using bits, genitals, gonads, like internal sex organs, chromosomes, all these things. Some of them might say you look like a man or you should be classed as a man. Some of them might say you look like a woman or you should be classed as a woman, and you can have bits from both. And the important thing here is that these people who do have atypical combinations, they know if they're men or women or not. And if we say, oh, so you're telling me sex is binary, and they're like, okay, they back off because they can't actually give a definition that's binary, then they'll just be like, yeah, but that doesn't include you. So that's the end of that discussion. But the point is here that you're trying to create a definition that would miscategorize some of these people. There are going to be people out there who are like, well, of course I'm a woman, of course I'm a man, I've always been a girl or a boy. This is just my life. And you say, oh, well, actually, you've got these chromosomes, so technically, no, you're not. It's like, that isn't how it works. That's the point here. There's something more than just looking at one random component of people and trying to class people by it. You can't do that. People are a sum of parts, and then we're trying to fit them into these two social categories. So this is an argument strategy. I guess it's a little bit clunky, and it's vulnerable to the gender critical hard pushback of stop talking about intersex people. They don't want you to talk about intersex people because intersex people are also harmed by gender critical ideology, but also because they're a problem. But it's very easy to deflect. I don't think Ian's going to do that.
So it's not as straightforward as just XX and XY chromosomes, because we all start off as female anyway, don't we? And depending on the amount of testosterone and everything we're exposed to, depending on how male we get.
Kind of.
And so there's a whole spectrum. And so many people can have an extra...
Yeah, it's all right. I think Katie's doing well, and I'm sure we're nearly end of this section anyway, but... and I'm cutting in a little bit, but I'm just going to say I personally don't like saying spectrum. When I think of spectrum, I think of the colour spectrum, where it's like red and then orange and then yellow and then green and like, fading through all the colours. But it makes it feel like it's an end-to-end thing. And then when people hear the word spectrum about sex, they think, oh, so we've got man here and we've got woman here, and then we've got this like sliding scale, and there's someone here who's like 2/3 man and 1/3 woman. And that I think that's a kind of derogatory way of looking at it, because then you can get the situation where you're saying to an intersex person, you're less of a man than him, biologically. And no, that's garbage. And I know that isn't what Katie means, and I know that's what lots of people don't mean, but it is sometimes what it communicates. And I know talking to intersex people, lots of them have found that offensive, because that's the reading they've got from it. Though I guess my alternative would be to say bimodal distribution, which is more true and less room to misinterpret, but I don't know what percentage of the population knows the hell what a bimodal distribution is. So I guess if I was explaining it to someone for the first time, I'd say we have all these different sex characteristics and they don't necessarily all point in the same direction. And not everyone has the same setup and combination. So not all men will have all the sex characteristics that are typical for men. And that's kind of the same point here.
A chromosome, and they're called intersex. You can have actually 5 chromosomes. And so for instance, they could have a vagina, but they could have internal testes. But of course, at the time they're born, the internal testes aren't found, and they're not found until later on in life. But this is, and that affects just under 2% of the population, which in the UK is about the same number of people who've got ginger hair. Not necessarily the same people, so don't go jumping to any conclusions, Ian.
So this is, I don't know if this is technically true. It's close. It's a similar vague ratio. I know that the thing here is that what counts as an intersex condition is, it's a definition. Like, it's kind of an arbitrary definition, really. And seen some people say that trans people count as an intersex condition, or even that polycystic ovary syndrome is an intersex condition. And a lot of people might not like that. I think a lot of intersex people might not like those people being included under the definition. And the reason is, as I always say, there's 2 reasons why you need to label people. One is because it's a description, and 2 because you're fighting for people's rights. I'm sure that people with polycystic ovary syndrome have unique situations that they encounter and face certain types of discrimination. But whether it aligns politically with intersex people and the discrimination they face, and whether it makes sense to put them all in the same bucket when discussing that, I don't know. I'm not an intersex person. I am an intersex rights activist in that I care passionately about their rights and fight for them. But I would have to defer to their arguments here, and I am interested if anyone has an opinion on this.
but this is but that's just enough to quantify it.
Yeah,
but that is just the primary sex characteristics. We're all used to seeing a whole spectrum of secondary sex characteristics. If you think of the typical alpha male, he'll be tall, he'll be broad, he'll have big hands, big feet. You know what to say about
alpha?
Men with big feet, big shoes.
Yeah.
But and he'll have a square jaw, protruding forehead. But not all men look like that. Many men are much smaller. They're more petite, heart-shaped faces. Look at women. Not all.
I'm not quite sure if this was the the best argument route, but we'll see.
Women have look like the traditional Barbie doll. Many women have much more masculine appearance, and we're all really cool with that whole spectrum of secondary sex characteristics. But that's just sex. That's got nothing to do with gender. Gender is the sex of your brain, and it's how it manifests itself in how you feel in your head and your heart. It's just intrinsic in you, and you know from a very early age, usually from around sort of 3 or 4, you start developing a really deep-scented sex.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a decent enough explanation, I guess. I know that the gender criticals, I know exactly what they'll be saying in response to it. The idea that your brain has like a single sex, I guess, is I don't know, dubious. I would rather than saying, I guess I avoid saying gender to mean gender identity, because gender identity is the term that like the international medical organizations use, and it's the one they've settled on, and that is what they use to describe how trans people see themselves and how their body aligns with their gender identity. Whereas gender can often mean other things, and we can kind of get in this situation where it sounds like we're describing presentation, or we're describing like stereotypes or this kind of stuff. Though this is the kind of thing that, gender critical people pick up on, I'll pick up on. Will the general public have an opinion on this? Don't know.
So, can I just pick up on that point, Katie? So when somebody like J.K. Rowling will talk about, and I'm probably paraphrasing her here, but others will talk about a lived experience, that the backstory of being a woman. Somebody like you, Katie, somebody like India and others, you haven't got that story. Your contention would be, well, we would have exactly that story had we, when there's a point in years to come when, a blood test will determine this bang like that, then the story would be the same. So
I mean, this is a fair comment from Ian in that it's a fair question. Him saying, well, is J.K. Rowling just saying you have different histories? Backstory is a good word for it. Makes it sound like you're a superhero or something. But like, his question here is like, well, J.K. Rowling just saying you've got different experiences, so you should be different. And the answer here is like, there's two parts to this. One is some trans people transition, like Katie said, at the age of 3, and lots of their life experiences. So we're talking about life experiences here. Growing up facing sexism, maybe being sexually harassed as like a child, which so many cis women experience, or cis girls experience even. Those experiences are ones that at least some trans women face. So this claim that trans women and cis women are different, like totally different separate groups, isn't true. This is maybe where the word spectrum might come in more. But also then there's often these claims about the like shared biological experiences. Like the classic one is going through puberty and then having periods and menstruating. But that's one of these situations where there is no characteristic or experience that all cis women share that no trans women do. And I think that's kind of the key point to push home here, is that the point here is when we're talking about these things, the most important reason we're talking about this is so we can combat misogynistic oppression of women. And there's no part of that all cis women experience and no trans women do, and so we can separate them into two separate groups. It's one big thing that affects all women, trans and cis, in at least some ways. And there are shared patterns. Like lots of trans women will experience this one thing more often, and lots of cis women will experience this other thing. Most cis women menstruate at some point in their lives, most of them. So that is the thing that a huge group of women will experience, the challenge, the physical challenges of that, and also the prejudice that comes with that. But to say, oh, well, we have a different, cis women are different because they menstruate, then there'll be lots of cis women who'll be like, hang on, I never did that. And I'm still a cis woman. Are you saying that I now am more of a trans woman? Like, is that the group you're putting me in? when really these things aren't binary, and that's kind of the point that I would try and communicate here.
J.K. Rowling's point is irrelevant.
But the point
yes
is that I've always been a woman. I've always that's who I've always been. That's always been my gender identity. It's just that it took me a very long time to admit it to myself. No one chooses to be trans. It's not something we do by choice, because it's a really tough journey. Nobody chooses.
That is true. I don't know if it directly answers the point that he was raising about trans women and cis women being different. I mean, these are different groups, but we have shared experiences, and the shared experiences are the important bits that are the reason we're creating laws in the first place.
Chooses to be trans. The only choice we have is whether we do anything about it or not. And because of, I was born in the late 1960s, so in the early 70s, growing up as a kid, the culture was so different to what it is now, and it was just so much harder then. It was just nobody ever spoke about trans issues then. But let me just go back to gender. So just as sex isn't binary, gender isn't binary either, and there's a whole spectrum, and it's not linear either. So many people are what's called agender. They don't have a gender at all. But I don't want to confuse you too much. Just think of it as
it is very easy to provide too much information. These are big topics, and I think this is why I'm so stressed beforehand, because I'm like, what are the important things I'm communicating here? Like, I'm not doing any of these things for me. Like, I could go on these shows and just big myself up. I kind of hate doing this. I do it because I think it's important and I think I can do a decent job. But like, in that, I always think, what am I trying to communicate here for trans people? What is the important thing that the public needs to know? And the important thing here really is that they need to know. And again, this isn't me criticizing Katie. Like, it's very difficult going on shows and she's done a good job. But like, the general public doesn't necessarily need to know about what agender people are in a why isn't Labour defining women, is J.K. Rowling a transphobe conversation, because, there are trans people. Maybe that includes agender people or not. That's totally cool. We can have that discussion. But the important thing here is that J.K. Rowling is trying to say trans women and cis women are different, therefore trans women shouldn't have rights. And that's the key bit. That is the bit that everyone needs to know about.
As linear, with 100% male at one end.
But there are
female.
clinicians and people that work in that world would say, actually, Katie, that isn't true. There are only there's two sexes, and there are two genders that go with that. You've heard all those arguments. Now, when you hear...
There's this one from Robert Winston, who's like some TV biologist, I don't know, and he's like, sex is binary and you can't change it. Sex is chromosomal sex, gonadal sex, genital sex, brain sex, and it lists off like 10 different things. Half of the ones you can change. And like, if sex is made up of those things, mate, and they don't all point in the same direction, and you can change some of them, then your original claim, sex is binary and immutable, is disproven by the second half of your own paragraph. That's the one. And like, gender critical people link that to me, and they're like, yeah, well, Robert Winston says this. Robert Winston says your point, and then 3 seconds later, he says my point. Anyway, yeah, we have heard those from certain experts.
That. And I do wonder, well, there's slightly more than one issue going on here, but I wonder whether the kind of stick that you guys get, and I say guys as in men and women, get, is the...
Oh, cis people. You lads. I mean, it's fine. I'm not offended by the word guys. If that's what you call your cis female mates, then that's what you can call me.
But it is based on this spectrum of genders, which has confused what was once, interesting, not particularly controversial, that there are some trans people. Now we're told there are 100 genders. We're told that if a kid wants to call themselves non-binary, they can do, even though they possibly don't even know what it means. We have companies bent...
Oh, Ian, you were doing so well until this point. What are you on about? Why would a kid call themselves non-binary if they don't know what it means? Well, I mean, I can so see where this has come from. They probably had some libs of TikTok thing where they've got some kid and they've been like, what do you identify as? And it's like some 12-year-old kid or something. They're like, I'm a non-binary person. And they're like, what does that mean? And they'd be like, oh, it's where I think that like, I'm not like a boy and I'm not like a girl. And they're like, what's that? What does that mean? What are you then? They're like, oh. And they're like, you don't even know. You don't even know what you are. And that's not the case. This is why I always push back on the word identify. Like, when you say, oh, this kid is identifying as non-binary and they don't even know what it means, the reality of the situation is they are something and they are trying to describe it. And in the vast majority of the cases, when someone comes out as non-binary, it's because there's some form of non-binary or trans, and that is the word that they have encountered that they think best describes their situation. That doesn't necessarily mean that non-binary is the final description that will describe them for the rest of their life, or even the best possible one at the moment. It means that there is the one that they understand and are trying to describe their reality. So when they say I'm identifying, it's not like they're choosing from a list of identities. They're searching for a description to describe who they already are.
Bending over backwards to accommodate for this. If you dead name somebody or misgender somebody, it's a crime akin to second-degree murder. Is it all of that?
Oh, Ian. I would be interested to if anyone had encountered a trans person, or anyone who has said that misgendering is akin to second-degree murder. Misgendering someone is like akin to getting a name wrong in some cases, and sometimes it's a form of harassment. And sometimes harassment is really bad. Sometimes harassment leads to, like, suicide. That is true. But to make the claim that, therefore, accidentally getting someone's name wrong is the same as murder, that's not a good argument.
That, do you think, that has kind of fed into this debate, and it's meant that people like yourself are getting some horrendous stick for it, which I find, I look online, I see the kind of things that are said, and it's just beyond my comprehension that one...
It is. This is very true. I don't show my cis friends the transphobic abuse that I get because, I don't really talk about trans stuff in real life because it's kind of boring and that's what I do on the internet. But it's so unreal how disgusting it is, and I'm so desensitized to it. And I've shown people before and it's looked like they're going to cry, and I'm like, mate, this is a 6 out of 10. And you're literally speechless about how grim this is. Like, this isn't even the worst thing I've got from this one person in this one conversation today. It's just the funniest one.
Human could treat another human in that way. That doesn't mean, however, that some people have views you will disagree with.
And it's all down to a lack of education on it. And most people have little or no education on trans issues at all. Most people don't know the difference between sex and gender. And that's why I do what I do, is to explain all that. And the whole thing has just become so heated and so toxic, just purely through this lack of education. And what it needs is more people to understand it. So
it is ignorance mainly, but there is malice here too. And I think that J.K. Rowling is an example of someone who started off ignorant and has crossed over into malicious. And, her little crew of malicious people who are going out of their way to campaign to remove all trans rights, they're not ignorant. They know what they're doing. Like, these people who are claiming to be scientists or even just claiming to be feminists, and they're, like, teaming up with Heritage Foundation to take healthcare away from children, like... That's not just like ignorance. They've encountered the counter arguments. They know they're campaigning against the international medical community. But she is right that the vast majority of people are just ignorant, and that's how they get duped by these little how do you define women word games.
Saying about non-binary, all it is that non-binary people are in the middle of that spectrum. So they're not male and they're not female. Yeah. They're non-binary.
But it's become
That's all it is. It's very simple. It's not difficult.
Well, if it's true, of course.
Of course it's true.
Well, we don't...
Oh, dear.
No, it's true, do we? That's the whole point.
Yes, we do. We do know it's true, Ian. I know loads of non-binary people. How can you say that it's not true, Ian?
Well, I appreciate lots of people will say it's true. But when I talk to a guy...
Who are you to say that you can't believe them, Ian?
So the argument that if I was gender critical I would go for here is people make a lot of belief claims. People might say, I'm a follower of Jesus, or, I believe in whatever God or something. And I'd be like, well, you think you do, but that's not real. Like, you're a Christian because you do a thing that other people like you do. You go and pray at churches and stuff. But that doesn't mean your God is real. So that would be the argument that I would make here as a gender critical person. I'd say, just because you describe yourself as non-binary, that doesn't make you non-binary. That doesn't mean that non-binary is definitely a thing, or it makes it a thing that people say they are. That means it's a cultural phenomenon. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a real condition of humanity, like sexuality or handedness are. You could claim that, you know, if humans didn't have handedness and we just could write equally good with any pen, every single human on earth was like that, and then someone was like, I'm right-handed, I can only write with my right hand, people might be like, well, that's nonsense, everyone can write with both hands. Just because you're claiming it doesn't mean it's true. But the important thing is we can test it. We can test for these things. We can see that, there's a whole bunch of, this is why the international medical community agrees that gender identity as a concept is something that they think is real. We can, test people's well-being after medical transition. We can see that people who are genetically related, for example, identical twins, even when separated at birth, are more likely to be trans if the other one's trans. We can see that conversion therapy just doesn't work, which isn't what we would expect if it was a social condition, because you could teach people out of it. Societies that are more strict on, trans people and strict on gender roles don't have, no trans people. When being trans has the death penalty, you don't just have no trans people, or even massively reduced rates. There is lots of evidence here, and there's decades of it for trans and non-binary people, and that is the point. That's the important part, not the fact that there are people claiming to be non-binary. That would be my argument.
I am simply saying that the explosion of non-binary people does throw up a question that is worth pursuing. So you're right. I can't sit here and say...
That is true. I mean, if you have a bunch of people saying, I'm a thing, it's worth science seeing what that thing is. I think that's fair.
That isn't a thing, no more than I could say that being heterosexual, trans, or anything isn't. Of course I can.
Being heterosexual is nothing. Interestingly, I should finish soon. I'm not going to rant off about. There's a concept called mandatory heterosexuality, or enforced heterosexuality. Some people are straight. That's just true, but a lot more people are forced to be straight than you might think. And I think that there probably more bisexual people in a non-sexist society than there are in a sexist society that has strong rules on sexuality. Anyway.
However, I wouldn't be doing my job, Katie, if I didn't wonder sometimes. Listen,
I haven't seen.
When I talk to a student at a university who says to me that 50% of his class of his year are non-binary, you start to think to yourself, hang on, that's a bit like 50% used to be goths. There's some people clearly here who are opting for the minority points. Is that reasonable?
No.
Oh, this is a classic. I guess this is a point where I might get a little bit confrontational. I'm not very confrontational in person, but was there a time when 50% of classes were goths? I mean, maybe 50% of people in a class on what's his name? Who come up with who's that dude who does existential horror? If you're doing an English literature class on existential horror, maybe 50% of the people in the class would be goths. But if you're doing on a cooking course at GCSE, probably not 50% goths. I don't know, maybe not doing too many stereotypes here, but I don't think that there was ever a situation where 50% of young people were goths. I think it's probably peaked at 1% and it's dropped down to 0.8% because there are still loads of goths. I know loads of goths. I know goths 10 years older and 10 years younger than me. They're still around. And I don't think there's... The thing is, you can do the numbers on this. I remember there was this case a while ago that they were saying, there's this class and there's only 30 kids in the class and 3 of them are trans men. What are the odds? But then if you look, there are 66 million people in the country, and so that means that whatever percentage of them are kids and whatever percentage of those are going to schools, and classes are about 30 people in a class, and it turns out that it's likely that there are several schools in the country, like tens of schools in the country, where 3 trans people came out in the same year because of just the odds. 50% of a class, what size? Is that really the number, or is it rounded up, or is it a Ben Shapiro statistic? Like, I don't know. I doubt that there are classes with 30 kids in where 15 of them came out of non-binary all in the same time, unless it's like some self-selecting class at a college, like studying queer issues or something. In which case, yeah, maybe. But if it's just like in a normal primary school or something.
No, all it is...
Half a school year are non-binary. Really?
Half a school year? My school year was like 200 people, so it's quite a lot.
You going to let me answer?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. Okay, so all it is that there's more education on it. Like when I was a kid going in the 70s, there wasn't any internet or anything. There was nobody spoke about this sort of thing. There is so much more awareness of this, and people now are becoming so much more enlightened to the fact that there are more than 2 genders and that it's not binary. And the whole point about this is being happy. We're not trying to transition to say that we're trans or whatever, to be somebody who we're not. We're just trying to be happy. And the whole point of it is that trans and non-binary people, all gender non-conforming people, are just ordinary people.
That is true. What Katie said there is definitely true. Doesn't quite answer his question, though. I do think that it's worth taking these gender critical points. I mean, I don't think Ian's gender critical from what he's saying. He doesn't come across like that at all. I think he's just heard some of their points and is asking the questions. And I think... I mean, maybe there is a primary school somewhere and there is 20 kids and 7 of them are some form of trans or like cis gay people. And then it gets rounded up to nearly half the class are LGBT people, and then it's nearly half the class are trans people. And then maybe there's something where there is a lot and then it's weird odds. And it's possible. Or maybe even there is a class somewhere where they've all just decided to be non-binary and they're not really non-binary and they're all lying. I mean, it's still worth addressing these arguments, taking them head on and just countering them and being like, I don't think that there is I think you've got your statistics wrong. I don't think there is a class, a school year where half of them are non-binary. I think the fact that we might get several non-binary people being friends and hanging out in the same classes together when they can choose what classes to go to, like in college and stuff, makes sense because queer people and, LGBT people are stigmatized by society, and they often make friends with each other and hang out together and probably pick the same subjects because they might be the only friends that each other have because they get bullied by the other kids and stuff. And the issue here is the stepping back issue. I mean, maybe. Okay, let's say we've got a class that's got half non-binary people, or half the kids are saying they're non-binary. What is the issue here? Are they all asking for medical health care? In which case, we need to look at the diagnosis for these children process and see if it is accurate and whether the success rate of patient well-being going up from the diagnosis process is good and the regret rate is low. And that is the case. We can look just at the the stats on prescribing healthcare for trans children around the world. The regret rate for transition is like, less than 0.5% or something, and it's mainly from transphobia. Okay, or the other option is they're not asking for medical treatment and they're saying, hey, can you refer to me like this? Yep. I don't really have an issue with that. Even if they're just making it up. Let's say you got a class of 30 kids and 15 of them say, I'm they, them from now on. Can you call me a new name? I'll be like, oh, bloody hell, this is a lot of things to remember. Better write this down in the register so that I remember and take some time. This is going to be a bit of a challenge. And then the next year, all 15 of them are like, oh, it was just a trend. We're all goths now. Can you call us by the pronouns that we used to be called by and our old names? I'll be like, oh, bummer. I just got used to that. Time for me to write the register again. I mean, what's the issue? Who cares? There's two parts to this. There's the social part, who gives a shit, and there's the medical part, which we have a diagnosis process for, and we can look at the results. I don't know. I think that's worth bringing up in these things. Because people will be like, oh, everyone's saying they're trans now, with some implication that that's bad. But like, in the end, what is it? What's the problem?
Yeah,
I'm happy.
Listen,
and
I totally get that. And I think of all of this discussion, being a trans man or a trans woman is not controversial, or if anything, in this wider scale of this debate, it's the least controversial point. I think it's the bit in the middle that is confusing people and creating the discussion or the
bit in the middle
debate and the hatred.
Just purely because of lack of education. I think you probably ought to come to one of my trans awareness training sessions by what you've just been saying.
Oh, spicy.
So I'd love to be able to come in and do some education for you, so that you can, just so you can help your way through this. Because,
but I'm aware.
I see what you're saying, Katie, but I feel like it's a little confrontational, and maybe he's come across like a bit negatively, and you're in the moment. But like, I feel like Ian is at worst ignorant or quite ignorant here, and maybe that doesn't mean that he needs education. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not criticising this.
Aware that lots of 14-year-old kids will kind of pick up on something and go, non-binary. Yeah, that's me. I'm non-binary. I don't feel like lots of kids.
So when this comes up, I would say this is a claim that people make. It's called rapid onset gender dysphoria. There is no evidence for it. There is only one study on rapid onset gender dysphoria which actually looks at trans kids, and it found no correlation for any of these claims that it's some kind of social contagion, that kids are buying into it. In fact, there is a huge amount of pressure on trans kids not to come out. Still, massively. The social contagion is forcing people into the closet. That's the real social issue at hand here. And it's important to point that out. It is. Because there's this claim just going wild. People are like, people are just getting suckered into wanting to be trans because it's a new hot thing. There's no evidence for that. The only one study which makes this claim that's like, is this fucking Lisa Letman one, which you can go and do a YouTube. There's so many takedowns of it because it's so bad and doesn't even look at any trans kids.
At 14 are a bit, not sure of their identity in many respects, right? We don't have to give them a non-binary tag.
But we know from looking at the science that people understand what their gender identity is around, and it cements and ferments, what I'm trying to say, solidifies in them as a person around the same time as their sexuality in adolescence. That's just something we know. That's what the science shows. So to suggest it's like, I don't know what music culture I'm into, that's a different thing. The science doesn't show that what music culture you're into like becomes a thing when you're like 11 and then stays for the rest of your life. Though that's kind of what I did with being a metalhead, so maybe it's a bad example.
When did you know you were a boy?
When did I've always known I was a boy, and that's
exactly.
the answer you knew I was going to give you.
That is the point. I've always known I was a girl, and non-binary people always known they've been non-binary, but
I don't think this quite applies to me. I think that if someone had asked me, "What are you?" I would have said a boy for the whole of my boyhood, and when I was a man, I would have very awkwardly been like, "Well, I must be a man because that, right?" But in that time I was experiencing gender dysphoria the whole way up. And I'm not disagreeing with Katie here. If that's how she saw herself, there are loads of people who the earliest memory of themselves is that they knew that they were, they considered themselves a girl or a boy. It just doesn't reflect my experience.
It's just with the education has allowed them to put a name to it. That's all it is. And the fact that we're actually having this debate, it shouldn't be a debate.
But I can have an instinct looking at other factors, Katie, and go, do you know what? I think there's a politicization of this, and I think there's 100 genders. I could come into.
They love this like 79 genders Facebook thing, don't they? The point is here is that if someone says I'm this gender. Cool. Piece of information. I might remember that. If someone's like, can you refer to me this way? Yeah, I will do my best from now on. And if someone's like, what else do they need? If you're a doctor and someone's like, can you give me some healthcare? And that's your job, isn't it? If there's 100, what if there is 100 genders? It's just slightly annoying, isn't it? But like, there's more than 100 names. I don't know. What's the problem?
work tomorrow and say, I've got a new gender, it's called Tuesday. And an email would go out to the building saying, Ian's got a new gender, he's identifying as this, and he therefore should be respected for that. And
yeah, right, mate. You're a Tuesday from now on. Don't affect me. Hey, what's going on here? What's the issue? I mean, are you asking for new pronouns? Do you want me to call you they, them? Do that? Okay, I respect you as a Tuesday.
But you're trivialising it.
No, not true. No, I'm simply saying.
You are trivialising it. Come on, mate. Come on. No one's a fucking Tuesday.
Saying everybody is scared witless to comment on it unless you're on Twitter.
Well, yeah, I think people are scared. Some people are scared to comment about this in both directions. And that's kind of I mean, it shouldn't be the job of trans people, but it is the job of some trans people. This is kind of why I do what I do. I want people to be able to approach me and say these weird questions like, hey, Katie, I don't want to be transphobic. I do genuinely support trans rights, but what happens if I identify as a Tuesday? I could be like, well, I'm going to take this question in good faith and I'm going to give you an answer. I don't give a fuck if you want to be a Tuesday. Like, what does that mean? What does that affect me? Who cares? That's cool. Do it. Like, see what happens. And then they'll be like, oh, okay. I don't know. People are scared because there's a transphobic question, but it's transphobic through ignorance here. And ignorance needs education, not aggression, in the same way that maliciousness might need combating, not aggression, standing up to bullying.
Would you have this debate if you were talking about race? Would you say that to an Indian person or a black person?
But that is the...
I know the thing here. It's that there are some situations where someone says something garbage and you're like, mate, if you said that about any other minority, you would know that was garbage. Why are you saying it about me? That's true. But what I don't like is this kind of framing that, people don't get racism anymore. You wouldn't be racist. Like, lots of fucking people are racist. Like, the other major culture war issue at the moment is about race. I mean, it's been about race for like 1,000 years or more, you know. But like, it's a huge issue. And I don't know. I'm sure that there are things that some people would say about race that they wouldn't say about trans people and vice versa. And if you can find them and you can get them one-on-one and say, mate, would you say this about these people? Stop saying about these people. That's an okay argument. But I'm always very careful not to say these issues are the same, but you wouldn't be racist, so why are you being transphobic? Because then people might be like, hey, people are racist to me all the time, and you're a white person, shut up.
The debate. Is this akin to race?
That is the point, is that it's about identity, and this is my identity, and the fact that there's constant media debates about our identity is offensive.
Just a very final point, Katie, because I would love to speak again on this. It's been a cracking conversation. But J.K. Rowling, look, she's not a figure of hate. She's not there to stir things.
Incorrect. She is a figure of hate now.
Up. She clearly has a position. You might not agree with her position, but would you concede that's just her opinion?
Is her opinion, but some opinions are garbage, some opinions are hateful, and some opinions are harmful. J.K. Rowling's opinions are factually incorrect, and they are harmful. They're causing real harm to people right now. She was recently quoted in Texas and some other states to take away people's healthcare, directly causing harm. She's targeting random, teenagers on Twitter with 1,000 followers and quote tweeting them and to cause a huge pileup. She's garbage and she's supporting all these extremists. So yeah, who cares? Yes, opinion's shit.
Well, that'd be all right if it was her opinion and she didn't have this huge fan base that she's misusing to spread this misinformation about trans people. But what she's doing is stirring up an awful lot of hate, and she's doing an awful lot of damage to trans people everywhere. We're not a threat to anyone. Trans women are women, and we're not a threat to anybody. We're just ordinary people who want to be happy.
Kate.
Yes. Good ending.
Great to have you on. Thank you, Katie Neves, with us.
Well done, Katie Neves. I'm sorry if you felt like I was being critical of you. If you watch this, I wasn't. These things are very difficult to do. I don't think people appreciate how stressful this is. I guess I grew up watching people on the TV and the news all the time, and they all just seem so chill. And then someone's like, "Hey, Katie, you've got strong opinions. Do you want to come and say your opinions on our thing?" And I'm like, "Fucking hell, I'm having a panic attack." Ah! It's so easy to look and be like, "You should have done better." I don't know. I don't want to come across like that. I hope that it's come across as me just saying how I would have answered it and what my opinion on these arguments and why I make those arguments. In the end, I think that from the sounds of it, Ian might have a few dubious views, but he sounds like he wants the best for trans people. Obviously, Katie wants it, and hopefully it comes across that I want that. So we're all in the same boat, and J.K. Rowling is not in that boat. She's in her flipping warship, cruise, yacht, castle garbage, firing cannons at our little push boats. Anyway, crap analogy over. I was planning for this video to be like half an hour, and it's been an hour and 40 minutes. Thank you very much for everyone sticking around. I hope that it was informative, and I hope that we're starting to get to the point where they're starting to ask trans people to go on and give their opinions on things. Some of the news has realised that trans people giving their opinions gets a lot of attention too, and not just gender critical people. And when some of the news will pick up on the fact that gender critical ideology is fucking garbage and absolutely crumbles and is full of so many scandals, they're going to start doing it, and they're going to want more trans people to go on the news, and they might ask you, and it will be good if you have the energy and the mental health for it to think about all of these things. What message are you trying to communicate? What are the strong arguments to get there? Consider your audience, all these kind of things. And listen to, people like Katie Neves doing it. She's doing a great job. Whatever. Come listen to me. I'm doing an annoying job. And maybe you can go out and do these arguments as well. Yeah. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, I'm sorry this wasn't very interactive, come check out the Transatlantic Call-In Show tonight at 11 p.m. UK time. Tonight I'm on with Mia Mulder from YouTube, and she will be taking your questions too, so that will be really exciting. Check out some past episodes. Also, talking of call-in shows, my next video announcement is going to be, I'm close to releasing an edited video of a time when I argued on a call-in show with Dr. Stock. It's going to be spicy. So perhaps if you do a subscribe, then you will get notified of that when it comes out, and you can see a violent trans activist, male, woman-hating science denier like me up against Dr. Kathleen Stock, OBE, defending her very rational worldview. It should be good. But anyway,